little while since I updated my personal rig, and while my current system is hardly getting old, when the opportunity arose to build in this, the new Asus Zero Cables Hyperion case, it got me thinking, could it be time for a change? Well, in this video, I guess I'm going to find out by building one of the most insane gaming PCs we've ever assembled on the channel. With the most powerful GPU you can buy right now, one of the most ridiculous looking PC cases I have ever seen, and with Intel's incredibly warm but very powerful i9-14900K, this is a build that really is going to push it to the max. I'll be walking you guys through in this video the whole build process, how easy or difficult this system is to put together, and looking at those performance figures later to see whether a build that costs a staggering $5,000 could ever be worth the price tag. Let's do this. The Corsair K65 Plus Wireless is a 75% mechanical gaming keyboard with hot-swappable pre-lubed Corsair MLX red switches. You get 2 wireless connection modes with both Bluetooth and 2.4 GHz and up to 266 hours of battery life for non-stop gaming. Customizable RGB lighting, Corsair IQ support and a programmable rotary dial make this a compact keyboard that has it all. Perky RGB lighting, a sleek grey and silver design, 2 layers of sound dampening and screw-in stabilizers round off a keyboard with plenty of features. What better place to start with this build than with the case, a chassis that's kind of like none other. Now, removing the side panel, which I think is easy enough. Oh yes, like so, gives me a bit of the glimmer of the pure insanity that's going on. Now, not only do you get one tempered glass side panel, you get 2, one on the front and the rear, as well as copious supports for large motherboards, huge graphics cards, and 420mm fans at the front, the top, and the back of the case. This version is the BTF design, which basically adds these additional cutouts for all of the cables, helping to hide basically every single connection in this build. Even the CPU cooler, which I'll come on to shortly, has been optimized to minimize the amount of cable mess going on. There's obviously cool features like an integrated GPU support bracket. Asus have got this pretty cool like hidden screwdriver going on at the bottom where you can grab your screwdriver and store any excess screws. There's a secret little compartment to store, I don't know what really, something you don't want people to find. And an outer design that's just crazy. Like you get these massive beefy handles on the top, this kind of X frame goes around the whole chassis. It's just unbelievable. And while it is of course expensive, it has a wow factor that many cases right now simply do not have. So I'm quite excited to build in this. I have been for a while and it's taken me a long time to actually get my hands on one. It's also probably worth mentioning at this point the motherboard, because of course when it comes to Zero cables, you obviously need a board that supports the case and chassis you've gone for. Now you can see here we've got cool features you'd expect, like Wi-Fi 7 support, quick release on the graphics card to get that out nice and easily, and of course an I/O that is absolutely stacked. However, what's more important is this slot right here. This is basically the power connector for the graphics card and allows compatible Asus GPUs to be connected up to the motherboard with ease. If I had to be really critical of the BTF stuff, and you were seeing it from Asus, MSI and GeekaWhat are also joining the party now, I'm sure the likes of ASRock, others will follow, is that it does kind of at the moment tie you into one brand. Obviously you can't get an MSI BTF compatible motherboard and pair it up with an Asus compatible rear facing GPU. It just doesn't work like that. So you have to keep the theme of the build much more tight. So there's not that much of an issue today anyway, to be honest. Now when I talk about back to front cables, you can see them around the board. So all the front panel ones are here, which is great. Got our SATAs, that's where our GPU power is going in from the power supply, front panel USBs, motherboard, fans, and then of course our CPU power connectors too. Now, in many ways, I'm kind of torn with BTF. I like the clean aesthetic it's going to provide, but I also think that removing the ability to show off cable extensions is actually kind of a downside in many builds, so something certainly there to bear in mind. Now, I talked earlier about the CPU. This is of course Intel's i9-14900K, and if you really wanted to push this build to the max, then you could of course pop in the 14900KX, which is a binned and overclocked version of the 14900K. For this system, I think the 14900K Standard Edition, with its measly 24 cores, 32 threads, and near 6 GHz boost clock speeds, is going to be totally fine. Now, on the memory front, I've picked up what might look like one 32GB kit, but you'd be wrong. I've got 2 32GB kits for 64GB of memory in total. This stuff's running at 6200 MHz, so it's nice and quick, and has a decent CL latency as well. When it comes to RAM, you could obviously go up to 128 gigs in this build by using 4 32GB DIMMs, both more memory options and all the other parts today in the description below for Amazon and Newegg for different regions around the world. Storage-wise, again, this is an improvement on lots of the high-end builds I've been doing recently. This is the MP700 Pro SE from Corsair, and crucially, it's a Gen 5 drive without a fan. Hallelujah! I've so many Gen 5 NVMe's with active cooling that's noisy, it's clunky, they're massive. Look at how small this thing is. I've got no idea how they've done it. 14,000 megabytes per second on the read and 12,000 megabytes per second on the write. You can find full review of this to validate those speeds at the links below, and for many of the other components today too at GeekaWhat.com. There is just one more thing I do need to do before moving the motherboard into the case, and that's take a look at the cooler and specifically add in some of the mounting hardware that the cooler requires. Now this is Corsair's iQ-Link H170i LCD. Now in layman's terms, it's I think probably their flagship CPU cooler right now. It's a 420mm RAM, so 340mm fans. That's not only going to fit the chassis much better, but the i9 is a hot boy, so the more cooling we get, the better. The LCD screen's also going to look really nice. Now, this is not a build where, if I'm being honest, I was being particularly price conscious at all. This is a system that's supposed to just push the boundaries, and apart from being hardline water cooled, there's probably not that much more high end than you can go than this unit. So really, really chuffed to have this in here. Now, if we debag it all, you can see the water block with the screen, LCD, and all the cables nicely tucked into the tubing. And a trend that we're seeing in more and more coolers now, I mean, even a GeekaWhat cooler I had in, did it the other week, it's pretty amazing, is these pre-installed fans. Now, they are pre-installed obviously in one orientation only, which means putting it at the top. So if you wanted to put this at the front, you're going to have to change those fans, take them off, and screw them back on. Either way, though, that does make our life a little bit easier, so that's good to see. On the water block is the Intel bracket, so no work to do there. However, that isn't to say we're fully ready on the motherboard side. So, in this little box of tricks right here, we should find a few things that I need. This is the CPU backplate, so that needs to be installed onto the rear of the motherboard. And then additionally in here, there is a bag of LGA 1700 screws. So these are also going to screw into the backplate. So I'm going to pop the backplate on, pop these screws on, and then I'm ready to finally secure the motherboard into the case. With this in place and looking pretty good so far, radiator is next. Now, there's 340mm at the front of the case, but they're not RGB, which is a bit naff. So Asus, I think maybe they could be upgraded in future. Same with the one at the rear. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to swap the one at the rear out for an RGB fan. 3 at the front, I'm going to change those to be Corsair QX to match the fans on my iQ-Link cooler. These are also some of the nicest fans out there. They look good from both sides, whether they're in intake or reverse, and they're super bright, easy to control, and connect together nice and easily for minimal cable management. This then is going to go at the top of the chassis, and I'll replace the rest of those fans a little bit later. Oh, nice! And you can see what I mean about the cables. We've got no cables from the water block, so that means once this is on, it's going to look super clean. In fact, this is the orientation I'll be installing it. If you look at the bottom of the water block, you'll see there is pre-applied thermal paste, so just pull this plastic protective cover off, add the water block sort of roughly around the CPU, and a thumb screw in each corner will stop that from going anywhere. Going to deal with the iQ-Link cable, which goes up to the top right-hand side of the cooler a little bit later when doing all the cables and wiring. The beauty of this build being back-to-front cables also means that installing things like the GPU now are fine, because we don't need access to any of the connections on the front, because they aren't on the front. Now, this is the 4090, and I feel like I'm so desperate for a 5090. We might be upgrading this build sooner than we think. The 4090, you guys know, I feel like we've been around the houses about what this card can do. You've seen the benchmarks. If you haven't, here's some graphs. This STRIX model is particularly exciting because it's very, very powerful. And when it comes to graphics cards, very powerful is, of course, what we like. After all, how else am I going to play F1, City Skylines, and the occasional bit of Fortnite? Just kidding, don't actually play Fortnite.
What?
Either way though, this thing should be nice and easy to install. The GPU support bracket is already in place. I'm gonna move that down a bit once I can find, my screwdriver, on the basis that it doesn't need to be quite this high. If we make it nice and low, then of course we can adjust the height and bring it back up later when I have the graphics card installed. Now, looking at the PCI slot, that's pushed back already, so that's fine. PCI lanes already look like they've been removed from whoever built this last time, so we should be good to just slide it in. Yeah. Bit of pressure, and you can see we're good to go. Before screwing it in, I do just want to point out where the power interface is. So you can see it just here below the memory. That's next to the PCI slot. So all that power is being handled from the front, which is essentially just a fancy pass-through for the Gen 5 cable on the rear of the motherboard. And then with all said and done, the front of the build is pretty much there. Got those fans to change, and I'm also going to add in some RGB strips just to mix things up a little bit. However, the rear panel is now most certainly what needs attending to. So if I spin this behemoth around, you can see you get this nice little door, which I'm hoping, does that come off or is that on forever? That is sort of off. There, yes, that is off now, out of the way. This is the bit of the build that actually should be made far more simple than normal. You can see here, things like the power supply connectors, nice and easy to access. In this system, I'll be using the CORSAIR RM 1000E. So obviously a high power build, i9 4090, you need plenty of wattage. I'm pretty confident 1000 will be enough. Originally I was going to use 1200, thought that was a bit overkill. This is Gen 5, ATX 3, basically get the new connectors for the GPU and the efficiency levels are better. This one is Cybernetics Platinum rated, seeing more and more manufacturers use that rather than 80 plus gold at the moment. So whack that in, connect all the cables, and we should be pretty much done when it comes to this frankly ridiculous gaming PC build. When it comes to performance, it's safe to say I had high expectations of this build, especially when you consider the CPU and GPU combo is the best for gaming that money can buy right now. Now, the first game I used to test this out was Call of Duty's Warzone. Here at 4K high, DLSS enabled on the quality preset, the build did really well, 178 FPS on average. As you can see, the game looked really fantastic, very competitive on the frame rate front. To be in a world nowadays where a nearly 200 FPS average is almost normalized at 4K with a card like this is extraordinary. Modern Warfare 3 was a very similar example, pretty much identical settings, and we saw a really sizable performance uplift, up to 223 FPS on average with this build. Very nice indeed. Starfield at 4K was next. This is probably about as AAA, poorly optimized, as hard to run as it gets. The build again did wow. 4K high, 110 FPS on average. Starfield, definitely a bit of a mixed bag, but if a system can run Starfield, it can basically run anything. Hogwarts Legacy, though, is actually one more game that really pushes this system to its limits. Not as poorly optimized as Starfield, just a really difficult game to run. Loads of textures, big open world, 4K high, and the build didn't quite tip over the 100 FPS mark with just 99 frames per second on average. This is an RPG and frame rate is naturally less important anyway, so 99 FPS is really quite nice. Fortnite at 1080p competitive settings, just for a bit of a laugh next. Everything tuned down to low except the render distance, which was pumped to far, and the build achieved, as you would expect, a ridiculous 348 FPS on average. Really, what's not to love? Apex Legends brings us back into reality at 4K high settings. This is where I think you guys, if you do assemble this system and you are going to spend a lot of money, will be playing 4K high, 242 FPS on average, because why not? Formula 1 2023 rounds off the benchmark suite for this video. We'll be swapping this out for F1 2024 soon enough. Here at 4K ultra high with DLSS enabled on the quality preset, delivered 229 FPS on average. What do you guys think of this build? It really does not get much better on the performance front, and it's a system that, as you might expect for the money, can run just about anything. If you enjoyed this one, make sure to get subscribed, drop a comment, let me know what you think, and if you enjoyed these videos, hopefully we'll see you in the next one.